Thank you, everyone, and welcome all of you to for Siddhi Day celebration at Sri Aurobindo Yoga Foundation. We are so fortunate to be here today celebrating Siddhi Day. Today, Govind is going to speak. So, without much further ado, Govindji.
Sure, thanks.
Sorry, take me. I think Ambika wants to speak the message. Read the message.
Yes. Ambika, go for it.
Yes. To spiritual experience, it is not a speculation, but a fact that there is a Godhead immanent within, behind this flawed and imperfect human nature. It is also part of spiritual experience that there is something beyond in which this divinity, or whatever other name you may give to it, is above the contradiction offered to it by this world of disorder and ignorance. That is the meaning of this transcendence. Whatever wide difference there may be between different ways of spiritual experience, whatever names may be put on these things, so much is fairly universal. If there were not these certitudes, there could be no assured spiritual life or endeavor.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Is there a way to get that message
Sure.
emailed to us so that we can print it out?
Yes, Bernie. I'll send it to you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Ricky, do you want to speak about your project now?
We बाद में we'll have the announcements later.
Yeah, something really very significant and ambitious that
आवाज कट रही है आपकी.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's good now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just telling everybody that it's a very significant and ambitious undertaking by Vivek. Something very interesting and extraordinary. So hoping that can hear about it from Vivek. But I think Vivek, if you want, I can finish my part and then we can talk about yours.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so in fact, so as we know, today is Sydney Day, and originally my intention was to try to talk about the topic was supposed to be, I think, the three-pronged will towards perfection. I think in the sadhana. And I think as
Vinji,
I was, yeah.
आवाज clear नहीं है आपकी.
Achha, should I try to then?
Yes.
What I'll do is I'll take my headset off and see if that works.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very clear.
One minute. Huh? I'll just have 1 minute. I'm just looking at this. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No problem in hearing it. Is my voice breaking up or?
Your voice is okay now.
Okay. Let me know if the voice will be okay. I can try a couple of things from my side. Yeah. So as I was saying, I think that originally we were going to talk about the topic was supposed to be the three-pronged will towards perfection in sadhana, integral yoga. As in, when I started to look at things, the question about the significance of the day itself came to be more and more prominent. Uh, Essentially, what do we mean by its delay? What is the significance of the day itself? I know we have spoken about it at length in the past. I think we've touched upon it, but I thought that maybe we can do or try to do a slightly deeper dive based on what we find in Shioda's own writings. So I started to look to see what I could find in writings of Shioda, which could help us gain a better understanding. So I'm just going to start from where Shioda actually describes the overmind itself in the life divine. So this is, in fact, the chapter. Maybe I can actually share the screen. You can actually see it. Oh, I actually can't say
I
it.
can make you host this. If I make you co-host, right?
Yeah.
I make you host, I will lose the video here.
Okay, you know what? I can then just read it. That's all right. I'll just read it and I'll talk through it. So this is basically the chapter, the ascent towards,
પાણી હમણાં બહુ નહીં પીતી
and this is
પૂરતી પૂરું થયું જરાક જ આપજો એટલે ગોળી
so this is well into the life divine. It's page 987. So almost near the 1,000-page mark. And Shrivandu here is talking about the the, the stages of transformation that occur as the being actually ascends higher and brings down the higher powers into the nature. Right? This by itself is a very unique process, or something that's very unique to Sri Aurobindo yoga, because as we always should remind ourselves that the goal of Sri Aurobindo's yoga, unlike all the other yogas, is not merely liberation or mukti. It's not merely realization or anubhuti, but it is transformation. Because ordinarily, all yogas essentially divide all existence into two great realities. There is spirit, and there is matter, and there is soul, and there is nature, and there is Purusha, and there is Prakriti, Shiva, and Shakti. Uh, Originally, it has always been recognized that these are one and the same. That Shiva is Shakti, that Purusha is Prakriti. But the way traditional spirituality sees is that Brahman and Maya, that there is a separation, and for very practical reasons. Because if your goal is liberation, if your goal is mukti, then you have to have this uh, separation. Because what is it that's getting mukti? It is the spirit which is getting mukti from matter. It is the soul which is getting mukti from nature. It is the Purusha which is getting mukti from Prakriti. So Sri Aurobindo actually goes beyond this thing. He says, why is it that you have Purusha and Prakriti? Is it just so that the Purusha can experience Prakriti? Why is it that you have Maya and Brahman? Is it only that Maya has to conceal or obscure Brahman? And why do we have Shiva and Shakti? Is it just so that Shiva can enjoy the play of Shakti? And it is here that Shiva actually says that the goal is not just to remain at a certain level of consciousness, but that there is an evolution of consciousness. And this evolution of consciousness is actually the evolution of the God in nature. And the process of this evolution is essentially a divine yoga in itself, which is the yoga of nature. And the yoga of Sri Aurobindo makes this conscious within us. Whereas everywhere what we see is the yoga happening unconsciously. everything is unconsciously evolving. What Sri Aurobindo yoga does is that it makes this evolution of nature, this evolution of divine in matter, conscious in this. And that is why then we come to this whole idea of ascent and descent. That you not only ascend upwards, but you also bring down the different powers of God which are concealed, and you reveal them in nature and manifest them in new creations in nature itself. And broadly speaking, we all know about the psychic transformation and the spiritual transformation. Psychic transformation is what Shivna described, finding one's own soul or the psychic being and coming into constant living touch and contact, living in union with the mother, the divine within, and finding this being of joy, this Anandmaya Purusha, or this delight soul within us, behind uh, the soul of desire, or the vital formation within us. To find that, that is the psychic transformation. And beyond that, the more well-known or the widespread idea, the spiritual transformation, where you find the Atma and universalize your consciousness, you become one with everything. That has usually been posited as the goal of spirituality in the Indian tradition and many other traditions also, because that's the summit of spiritual realization for most, if not all of spiritual paths in one way, shape, or form. But beyond this, Sri talks about ascending to higher levels of consciousness, beginning from the mind itself, the mind proper. You go higher, and there is the level of the higher mind, and even higher than the higher mind is the level of the uh, human mind, right? And beyond that is the level of the intuition. At least that's as far as I think that's the case. And above all of them is the level of the overmind. So, what essentially is this overmind? And I'm sure that it's not that something we can understand right away, but I think if we can look at Shivlo's description of it, it may be something that will help us to get some idea of what it is, right? So, in the Life Divine, again, in this chapter, the ascent towards supermind, in page 985. So, Shivlo says, when the overmind descends, the predominance of the centralizing ego sense is entirely subordinated, lost in the largeness of being, and finally abolished. So it has a fundamental effect on our sense of self, or self as in the ego self. That this ego self is entirely abolished almost at the end. A wide cosmic perception and feeling of a boundless universal self and movement replaces. So today, all our movements, all our thoughts, all our feelings, all the things that we do, even with our physical body, they are all ego-centered. Essentially, you can think about it as like a whirlpool that is revolving around a tiny little black hole, which is the ego. And it's all basically focused on the ego, and it's concerned with that. But what happens here with the descent of the old mind is that that formation is now no longer the case. It is almost as if you are the cosmos itself, self-aware, in a particular point, acting as the cosmos. Right? A wide cosmic perception and feeling of boundless universal self-movement replaces it. Many emotions that were formerly egocentric may still continue, but they occur as currents or ripples in the cosmic world. Thought. Now he's talking about what happens to the at the mental level. Thought, for the most part, no longer seem to originate individually in the body or the person, but manifests from above or comes into the cosmic, comes in upon the cosmic mind. So no longer do you think that it is my personal body, my personal formation, my personal personality, which is doing the thinking, which is coming up with these thoughts. which is essentially creating them, so to speak. Now you actually see that these thoughts are actually coming in. And where are they coming in from? They're coming in from this universal plane itself, but manifest from above. So it's like in keys that it comes from above, so that the higher range is, that's where the thought actually comes in. All inner individual sight or intelligence of things is now a revelation or illumination of what is seen or comprehended. But the source of the revelation is not one separate self, but in the universal knowledge. So now what happens to the feeling? That's it. The feelings, emotions, sensations are similarly felt as waves from the same cosmic immensity breaking upon the subtle and gross body and responded to it in kind by the individual center of the emotion. For the body is only a small support, or even less a point of relation. So essentially, Shravango is here is describing you are completely at this point very, very different from your ego-centered personality that you were once, right? You're completely transformed, your emotions are transformed. And he talks about the body also. For the body is only a small supporter, even less a point of relation to the action of the vast cosmic instrument. So he's not talking yet about the transformation per se of the body, right? So the significance of this change, and Shirabudo describes it in one line. He says, the overmind change is the final consummating movement of the dynamic spiritual transformation. So the word dynamic is really key because so far, all or most spirituality has focused on static spiritual liberation. What that means is that all that changes, all that is mutable, all that is in flux, all that is inconstant, all of that is, so to speak, non-existent. It appears to us, but is not real. It is no abiding reality. It's there today, it's not there tomorrow, it's never fixed in one place, right? So all spirituality said that whatever liberation you have, any true liberation must be a static liberation. And here again, it comes down to this whole idea of transformation. That Prindu said that there is a dynamic spiritual realization also. And here he's talking about this dynamic spiritual transformation. That now the very movements of nature assume a spiritual quality. Your mind assumes a spiritual quality, your heart, your emotions assume a spiritual quality. And your body to some extent reflects that as well. So the overmind change is the final consummating movement of the dynamic spiritual transformation. It is the highest possible status dynamism of the spirit in the spiritual mind plane. It takes up all that is in the three steps below it and raises their characteristic working to the highest and largest power. It takes up mind, it takes up life as well as the body. And here we are coming closer and closer to what happened on November 24th, 1926. Because the idea is that the overmind actually descends and it takes up the different parts of the body and it transforms them in a very, very fundamental way. Overmind and its delegated powers, taking up and penetrating mind and life and body, would subject all to a greatening process. And so this actually describes how this transformation is actually happening, the overmind transformation. And Shravana in fact talks about how at each step this actually works. Because every part of us, every part of our body, every part of our mind, every part of our life has to be taken up and transformed gradually. Now, one actual question arises that if you have this whole mind transformation, why do you need the supermind? Why not stop at the overmind? Because if you think about the description that Shravana has given us, it is so amazing and so fantastic. You might think that this is in fact divinization itself, right? And what Shravana says in another places that as wonderful as the overmind is, it still has a last little bit of trace of imperfection. Now, what is this imperfection? That there is still a basic fundamental division. This whole thing that we spoke about between life and matter, etc. that this dividing ignorance, this separative ignorance, it still survives, it still maintains itself. So even if it can transform our mind and life and body, it cannot completely transform. There is still that opening through which imperfection can still come in. And what happens is that when this is there, when this opening is there, the inconscient, the subconscious, the physical, they can actually influence the transformation and take over in some cases. So it cannot be the complete ruling power. And the only ruling power that can do it is the superman, which is above overmind. But here Shrivandu says that it is the overmind which transforms into the superman. So when you have become overmental, it is from that status that you become superman. That's why in many places Shrivandu said that, you know, aiming for supramentalization at any stage is not really the right attitude, because it is something that's so far. You're talking about the old mind, you're talking about the illumined mind, you're talking about the higher mind. I mean, forget about higher mind. The mind proper is also something that we are not. So what are we going to talk about? Superman. So how do we actually get, and what again really happened today? And there is another extraordinary letter of Shrivandu that gives us a clue about what happened today. When we think about over mentalization, right? Over mentalization of the mind, over mentalization of the life, that seems to be something that we can readily understand. Right? But the over mentalization of the body has a different logic. So in one of the letters, somebody actually asked Shrivandu that is it necessary that first the mind and the vital have to be completely over mentalized, and uh, that only after that that you can do the transformation of the body conscious. Because today, let's keep in mind, what is the significance of Siddhi Day? The significance of Siddhi Day is the descent of Krishna into the, and Shiva is very, very definite about what he said, right? It's descent into the physical. It's a descent of the over mind into the over mental power and consciousness into physical consciousness. So we are not actually celebrating the fact that it came into the mind and vital. The Siddhi was that it came down into the physical. And why is that? So Shivanand in his letter, he says that the body consciousness is there and cannot be ignored. So that one can neither transform the higher parts completely, leaving the body for later, nor make each stage complete in all its parts before going to the next. So this is the key, right? The next point. He says a predominant over mentalization of mind and vital is the first step. For instance, when over mentalizing. But the body consciousness retains all the lower movements unovermentalized, and until these can be pulled up to the overmental standard, there is no overmental perfection. Let me read that again. That the body consciousness retains all the lower movements over unovermentalized, and until these can be pulled up to the overmental standard, there is no overmental perfection. Always the body consciousness brings in flaws and limitations. So really, to complete or to achieve full over-mentalization, real over-mentalization, Shrivandu is saying that this over-mentalization has to be brought down to the level of physical. That in itself is something we can see why we would celebrate Siddhi. Because really, let's imagine for a moment that Shrivandu's mind and vital, the mental plane, the vital plane, all his mental movements, they've all been over. But he says that even then I cannot say that the Siddhi is complete. Why? Because it has to be something that transforms the body as well. And without it, I cannot say that there is over mental perfection. And how? How does this happen? It's something even more remarkable. It is to perfect the over mind, one has to call in the supramental force, and it is only when the overmind has been partially supramentalized that the body begins to be more and more overmental. So here there is this whole idea that first you become overmental, then you become supramental. Right? That seems to be the logical progression. Okay? Unless and until you become completely overmentalized, you cannot begin to think of supramental. But here Shivananda is saying that even to perfect the overmind, one has to call in the supramental force. And it is only when the overmind has been partially supramentalized that the body begins to be more and more overmental. So what can we conclude from this? That Sri Aurobindo had begun to become supramentalized way before Siddhi. So this should come as, I mean, it came as a surprise to me, because in my mind, always I was thinking that, okay, you have to become over-mentalized and only then you become supramental. So here is the reason why this is so key, right? That it is the supramental force that makes even over-mentalization possible. That since the day Sri Aurobindo began his yoga, then he went and ended up in the Alipur jail, where he had this vision of Swami Vivekananda, who told him about the supermind, or gave him a clue about what the supermind is and how to reach it. Since then, the supramentalization had already started. And the mother also describes when she first met Sri Aurobindo, on the first day when she meets Sri Aurobindo, I think March 29. She says that when I met Sri Aurobindo, I was telling him about all of these things that I could see in my vision, that these perfections that are going to come. And I asked him, are they going to happen? And he said yes. And when he said yes, for the first time, she saw the supramental consciousness and force touch the earth. This was in 1940. So already Sri Aurobindo had begun his supramentalization way back. And you can imagine that to come to the level of the body, the mind and the vital would already have to have been supramentalized to a great extent, not just overmentalized. And this is the significance of the day today, that this indicates in a very concrete way the progress that Sri Aurobindo had made, and a very definite milestone had been achieved. That now the process of over-mentalization was complete. And the supramentalization had already advanced to such an extent that the focus could now be just on supramentalization of the rest of the nature. And Sri Aurobindo speaks about going beyond just the physical, that you have to go into the subconscious, into the inconscient, and in many places he describes that the yoga actually came down to that level. And when it came down to that level, it became exceedingly difficult and hard. But this is the significance. And it is something very, very interesting to see how this dynamic is actually playing out between the fact that you have the over-mentalization happening, and behind it, the supramentalization also is happening at a higher level and enabling the over-mentalization. And you can then get a sense of how the sadhana was actually proceeding in Sri Aurobindo's case when you see all of these things. And there's actually a very good article also, which I think Deshpande ji has authored, a very short one, nice one, where he talks about some of these things. And he says that first, that what happened during the period 1915 to 1926 was not the ascent, but something radically different. 1915 is, let's say, when Sri Aurobindo started writing the Arya, and 1926 is when the Siddhi Day actually happens. It was the period of supramentalization of the various grades of the lower consciousness. Very radical. It's not just over-mentalization, right? First, it was supramentalization of the mental during the Arya period, 1915 to 21, and then the supramentalization of the vital. This finally paved the way, the path for the over-mentalization of the physical. Marking its Siddhi on 24 November 1926, what he later called the descent of Krishna consciousness in the physical. Sri Aurobindo's next concern was the supramentalization proper of the physical itself. For that, he put in a God's labor, digging the dark grounds of clean conscience. The result was the great light, the light of the Son of Truth, started descending into the physical. The first definite experience coming on 8th August 1938, he has recorded in his sonnet, The Golden. So this, when you get a sense of what Sri Aurobindo was really doing, how his sadhana was proceeding, you get some idea of the titanic, the divine labor that he has actually put in, never stopping at any place, never stopping at any siddhi, but siddhi after siddhi after siddhi until he reached this siddhi which we are celebrating on Siddhi Day, where the over mentalization of the physical itself became not just possible, but it was accomplished. And the over mental became, at one point, he says, I think the mother says that it became fixed. It became fixed in the physical. And there you get the sense that it was coming and going, touching and retreating. But on this day, it became fixed, the over mental consciousness. And then you can imagine, or you can even extend from that, that the physical movements of Sri Aurobindo, of his physical being itself, then at that stage, were completely over mentalized, and then supramentalization of the physical at that stage became possible. So that was something that I wanted to touch upon as the first part, because I wanted to share with everybody uh, some deeper aspect of what this day really represents. And I hope it didn't kind of go too much into very abstract things. It's something that we can, I think, relate to if you think about it, not just with the mind, but we also feel it from the heart. How Sri Aurobindo was doing this, and he was doing this, of course, for everybody, for the earth consciousness, and for the divine, and for the universe itself, not just for himself. But such a great and very significant step and stage and milestone was achieved on this day. The second part, what I started out with originally, my thought about this three-pronged will behind, will towards perfection. I think it started out in a couple of different ways. So I think I've already taken up, I think, half an hour, so maybe I'll just touch upon it. But I think it might be something that might help people, because always when we are talking about yoga, it is good to look at these great and wonderful achievements of Sri Aurobindo or any great spiritual luminary. But always, I think our eyes must be fixed on the here and now, on the practical aspect of it. What are you actually doing? Right? What are you actually achieving? And we are far, 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 far from it. So this is good to know, and it's something that's very inspiring. And the fundamental value of it, I believe, is that we feel this love and gratitude for Sri Aurobindo for what he's doing and what he has done. But let's come down to the level of each individual. Right? For example, today the message was about spiritual experience. So, what is it that actually takes us towards the experience? What is it that actually takes us towards these great and wonderful things which Sri Aurobindo is talking about and even accomplishing? Over mentalization, supramentalization. There is one power within us. Right? That power, when it is turned towards lower things, towards things which bring us to a lower consciousness, that power we refer to as desire. But when that same power, when it is no longer just diffuse, when it is no longer uh, broken up and scattered behind all the different things that we chase for our life, like mad, when it becomes concentrated, when it becomes one, when it becomes unified and single, that same power we refer to as the will. And anybody can tell you that essentially, even behind human achievement in everyday life, if you succeed at anything, whether financially, career wise, or in any field of human endeavor, politics, or science, etc., whatever. It is because at some point you have discovered this ability within you of concentrating this fragmented and diffuse power of desire, which is running and chasing behind all of these hundreds of things madly. You've been able to gather it, to concentrate it, and to make it single. And like a laser, you focus it at one point, you turn it into this will, and then there is nothing that you cannot achieve. This is the great power within all of us. This same power, when not just concentrated, but when it is turned instead of towards things below, which bring us down, when it is concentrated upwards, when it is concentrated towards higher things and greater things, towards spiritual things, where it's not just chasing after, let's say, money or power or all the other things that ordinary people chase after. When it goes after things like, let's say, supreme truth, absolute knowledge, selflessness, perfection in one's own nature and character, all of these things, egolessness, let's say, who tries for egolessness? But imagine if you tried for it, if you could concentrate your whole desire power, your whole willpower, and you turn towards that, that is when it becomes aspiration. And this aspiration has two parts to it. By itself, the will turn towards higher and upper things, greater things, spiritual things, even upper things. It becomes the power of tapasya. Right? This power of tapasya can be turned towards ordinary things also. And again, it is behind all human achievement. But when it turns upwards, then it becomes real spiritual tapasya. And you can see that it is not just something that the devas have, but even the asuras. If in our story you see all the asuras are great tapasvis. They're not very soft or very weak people. They're all great tapasvis. So they have been able to concentrate this power towards achieving the higher objectives. But not higher in a divine sense, but in the sense of power. So the one part of this is our personal will turned upwards in a manner of tapasya and concept. But the core of it is also a call, which is the other half of the two powers that Sri Aurobindo talks about, right? The call from below. Because aspiration is not merely a seeking, it's not merely achieving, it is also asking. Because we start with the faith that there is the supreme being, there is someone who can actually give us what we seek. If we can only ask, right, any spiritual realization, any higher achievement, if we are able to aspire for it, it can be ours, not through isolated struggle, but it can be given to us and made ready for us. Not only that, this power is there waiting for us. So this is the other part of aspiration, that it is the call to this higher being, this higher power, whom we call the divine or the mother, the Lord. And the siddhi is given to us. The siddhi descends into us, or we ascend to it, or we are lifted up by this power towards it. So this willpower, this concentration of the consciousness to achieve, is behind all that we do, either as desire, or either as will or ambition, or even as aspiration. And it is very interesting when I recently uh, took up a job that I was brought into a very close proximity to this question, that exactly what is this willpower? Because all of my interest, all of my passion was elsewhere, and all of my uh, nature was running in a different direction. So to speak. And here I was having to do a job to really support myself, to make sure that I was doing right by my family, etc. And always I have felt mother's grace and her support before as well. But this time there was also her inspiration. And I came to three different poises. What are the three different types of will, so to speak, which really made it possible for me to go forward. First was this aspiration or this will towards knowledge in my job as well. I found within me this great will that if I'm doing something, I want to be completely knowledgeable about every aspect of it. And it really lifted me up. It filled me with utsaha and enthusiasm. And I could freely commit myself to whatever I was doing just because, not that I was earning money or I was supporting myself and my family, but that I was learning something and that I was getting better at it. So this will for knowledge, for learning, was something that came very prominently. And a second aspect which came forward was to approach the work as a game, to approach it as some kind of a play, as we say, the Leela of the divine. That don't just do it as a job, take it up as a sport. You have a team, you're part of it, you want to make your team win. Let's say that's what happens in most jobs, right? And suddenly again, I was filled with this great enthusiasm. Yeah, let's do it. Let's achieve that for the team. And suddenly, everything that I was doing, I could see almost as uh, a movement or an action that I was doing on a sports field. Let's say I was playing football, and again, the work itself transformed into something very, very enjoyable, and I wanted to do it. Again, this was not something that I designed or I said I'm going to do it. It was something that came to me. And the third thing that came was, okay, once I get this knowledge, once I become so proficient in my job, I'm enjoying it, and even let's say I get a lot of understanding, I build up all these skills. What is it that I ultimately get? I get freedom, because the more skills I have, the more expertise that I have, let's say, the more knowledge I have, the more free I am, because I can go and apply these skills anywhere. And people will compete to get my services. People will fight for me and bid for me rather than me chasing the jobs. And this again, this idea of freedom became something very, very strong. And that also helped me really seize the moment, so to speak, and just every day just push myself and become really involved in what I was doing. And if we think about it, this this push towards freedom, this will for freedom, so to speak, is there behind almost everything. For example, if we go after money, it's not that we go after money itself, but the freedom that money gives us, right? Because we say, okay, once I have money, I can do this, I can do that, I can get this, I can get that. Without it, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't get this, I can't get that. So, what is that? Essentially, you're talking about your freedom. So, these three motivations that were coming into me and pushing me, so to speak, were something that is there within all of us. And we just to channelize those and invoke those. And they were being done in my case. And it was an extraordinary experience and still is on a daily basis. And what I wanted to kind of share with people is how nicely there is this correlation with these three separate, but these three distinct but not separate. Imagine Shiva's Trishul, the Trishul that Shiva carries, the three different prongs of that Trishul, how they are unified towards perfection. Because this will towards uh, the will towards knowledge really ultimately if you analyze it, if you dig a little bit deeper into it and you look at it, what it really is behind, it is really the will for progress, which mother has given so much importance, so much importance. And this is really behind all higher aspiration. People say, what do you aspire for? What do you, okay, aspiration is one of the three great things that you have to do. But what is it that you aspire for? Ultimately, what is it that you aspire for? You aspire for spiritual progress. Because unless and until you progress spiritually, how will you realize anything spiritual? Right? We call today's day Siddhi Day. How do you achieve Siddhi without progress? It's not possible. So this will towards uh, for knowledge ultimately becomes the will for progress, for becoming more, right? Not just more. The will towards freedom. What does that really indicate? What is this freedom that we ultimately really want? And I kind of touched upon it at the beginning, that what does traditional spirituality really tell us? That it is this freedom of spirit from matter, this freedom of Purusha from Prakriti. It is this freedom of the soul from nature, this freedom of Brahman from Maya that we really want. Because that is who we ultimately really are. Because the Brahman is always free, the soul is always free, the Purusha is always free, the being is always free, but it identifies in ignorance with the darkness, with that which enslaves it or that which obscures it from its own self. Again, nothing right or wrong. It is the power of God itself. Maya is a power of God itself to obscure himself from his own view so that he becomes what he is not, or he at least appears that to his own experience. But he never ceases to be God. So this will for freedom is ultimately what we would say is the will, the second will of yoga. First, we talked about the will towards progress, the will for progress. The second will in the will in yoga is the will for, and this is the key word, the will for purity. Because we hear this word a lot. What is purity? What is purification? It is not merely being a good person. It's not merely being ethical or moral or being somebody who just follows the rules all the time. This purity is essentially a freedom from all that we wrongly ascribe to ourselves as our own impurities, but really are just belonging to the lower nature. So this second will, this is the second great process of the yoga which Shavandor described after aspiration, and that is rejection. Because we reject all that is not that is not true, all that is not divine, all that is not something that comes from our own true self. And that purification leads to freedom. And the third will, the will to joy, the will to anand, that I believe points to the third will in the yogas. And this is the most important will, I would say. Of course, all of these, both of these other ones are extremely important. You can't go without them, but this takes precedence. And that is the will to surrender. Because surrender is key note of the whole yoga. Without it, you can't move one step ahead. And with it, all is possible. Why? Because everything, again, as I said, when you aspire to this being above or within or around, then that being, that supreme, the divine, the mother, does everything for you. Because Mother and Shiva have not just come to give us a new message, to give a new path to walk upon. They have not just come to preach or to write stuff, to talk, and that's it, or even to give us spiritual experience. They have come to lift us up and carry us. That's what they want to do. They want to make it not just possible, but they want to make it as easy as possible. That the same process that would have been so difficult would have been so cumbersome, almost impossible for the individual human soul, that it becomes something joyous. And truly, this will for joy, that yes, for me, Mother Shindo is what I consider to be joy, happiness. To find one's joy in the truth, to find one's joy in the divine. Then surrender becomes not just possible, it becomes natural. Because then you are in that state where you can't live without it. You're almost addicted to the divine, the way that we are today addicted to all that is not divine. So I think that this is the third will, the will to surrender, which really is this will for happiness, for joy. And do it for me. I want you, and I want you to do it for me. I want to be with you. And it's not that I'm just going to be this lone ego or soul just climbing all by myself, my own unaided strength and effort. The will to surrender. That is what I want to do in life. I want to surrender all to the divine. I want the divine. That is the third vehicle. And I will just read a quote from Shivananda and I will conclude over here. So people ask, how do you actually surrender? And one can write books on this, libraries of books. But I think the whole thing can be summed up in just one word, which I think we should really be very grateful to Dhirubhai Ambani for making it so popular. And I think if I say his name, I think this is the next word that comes into our mind of all the people. Why am I talking about him? Right? We're talking about yoga. He's just a completely non-yogi kind of a guy. Because what is the word that he used to refer to his corporation? It is reliance. How do you surrender? The easiest way, in one word, take to the path of reliance. So somebody is asking, how can I do yoga when I know nothing about our yoga? I do not even know what to do. Somebody is asking Shivananda. I don't know. So Shivananda says there are two ways of doing yoga, one by knowledge and one's own efforts, and the other by reliance on the mother. In the last way, one has to offer one's mind and heart and all to the mother for her force to work on it. Call her in all difficulties. There's not just spiritual difficulties, but every little difficulty. If your toe gets stuck, call the mother. Don't be ashamed. Do it. At first, it takes time. Often a long time for the consciousness to be prepared in this way, and during that time, many difficulties can come. But if one perseveres, a time comes when all is ready. The mother's force opens the consciousness fully to the divine, then all that must develop develops within. Spiritual experience comes, and with it, the knowledge and union. This is the path of reliance, the sunlit path. And all we need is a sincere and absolutely all-consuming will to surrender. This is the one thing that I want to do in this life. Whatever short period of time that I have, or long or short, I don't know. This is the one thing that I want to do with my life. And there is another very, very extraordinary writer by Shivananda that I came across. It's simply Shivananda calls it the path. And it's something I think that everybody should be, because he wrote this in the 1930s. Again, just the way that he wrote in the book The Mother, summarizing in very almost like these Mahavakyas, what really the yoga represents. And what he says in there is that this descent has to happen. That man cannot by his own effort make himself more than that. A descent of the divine nature can alone divinize the human receptacle. And for this descent to occur, the receptacle must be prepared. In the receiving end, again, us, the receptacle, there must be no inability to contain, no breaking down of anything in the system, mind or life or nerve or body under the transmitting stress. There must be an endless receptivity and always increasing capacity to bear an ever stronger and more insistent action of the divine flow. Just a few days back, something really small but very interesting happened, which brought home this whole lesson. Where I was trying to just make tea for myself, and I warmed up the water. I had my cup ready, and I put the tea bag in it, put the water in it, put the timer, and went away. And when I came back, I saw that there was water everywhere, tea water, which basically had been suffused with the tea. I was like, what did I do? Was I like thinking of something else and just absent-minded? I just spilled water everywhere. So I said, I just threw all the water away, the tea bag, put a new tea bag in, I put another, uh, you know, hot water, some more hot water in it. But this time I waited and watched. And what did I see? I saw that slowly, under the cup, water started spreading. So then I put two and two together and I said, aha, this looks like a perfectly good teacup. Looks very beautiful and very nice and completely ready for me to do what I want to do with it. But hidden in it is a crack. And all it takes is just one crack. I can't see it, must be hairline or whatever. But that one crack is enough to just make the whole thing use all the water that I poured. And this is again where this other will comes in, the will for purity. Because if you have any impurity within you, then this breakdown will occur. All of this force, all of this illumination, all of this great spiritual power that Mother or the Divine is pouring into you, if you are not ready, it will just spill out and you will also break. So this will for purity and this will for surrender have to go hand in hand. That's why in that chapter, the second chapter of the book, The Mother, Shunda says you have to have rejection along with surrender. Because without rejection, rejecting impurities, it's very difficult to hold whatever is being given to you or to even continue to progress. Then you yourself might break. This descent, this working is not without its possibility of calamities, fall, and danger, Shravana says. If the human mind or the vital desire sees hold on the descending force and tries to use it according to its own limited and erring ideas or flawed and egoistic impulses, stumbling deviations, then hard and seemingly insuperable obstacles and wounds and suffering cannot be escaped, and even death or utter downfall are not impossible. Only when the conscious integral surrender to the divine has been learned by mind and life and body can the way of yoga become easy, straight, swift, and safe. And it must be a surrender and an opening to the divine alone and to no other. For it is possible for an obscure mind or an impure life force to surrender to undivine and hostile forces, or even mistake them for the divine. Therefore, our surrender must be no blind and inert passivity to all influences, but sincere, conscious, vigilant, pointed to the one and the highest alone. And Chandra ends by saying this. He says, self-surrender to the divine and infinite mother, however difficult, remains our only effective means and our sole abiding refuge. Self-surrender to her means that our nature must be an instrument in her hands. The soul, a child in the arms.
Thank you, Govindji, for such a insightful and taking us through the journey of life divine and bringing the personal experience to merge into this three-pronged will, the topic today. It was really very nice to see on how on day-to-day basis we can really use the learning and teachings from the Mother and Shravinda. If anyone has any question you want to ask? Okay. So let me just give you some of the information for coming. So first thing, let me share this. So today you can call it unveiling of the SAYFNA logo. So this is our new logo of Sri Aurobindo Yoga Foundation of North America. So going forward, you will be now seeing this logo more and more in a different way or different, any email or document what we send, you will have this logo on it. Another thing which I wanted to show you is next program. So our next program is going to be on December 5th. Alok ji has agreed to give a talk. So it will be 9:30 a.m. EST. So we hope to see all of you there. And the topic will be freedom from death. So that's the second thing I wanted to share with all of you. And the third thing which Govind, one more thing actually we can share you. So SAYFNA, we have been working together with Alok ji to bring out some of his books. So there's a series of books we have planned to bring out, published by Sri Aurobindo Yoga Foundation. So this being a first book on it, which should be available as an e-book in a couple of weeks. And then print book or paperback edition is only for India, not for US, but so we'll be printing that in India and to distribute in India, and we'll figure it out. But for the ebook, it will be available, but that will also take a couple of weeks before it will be available. I'll send the email. It will also be available on our website. And one last thing, which I need to share is this, which Govindji was talking about. So this idea of creating a web series on Sri Aurobindo's writing in Bande Mataram, Karma Yogin, and the early writing. We are working with Dr. Chandra Prakash Dwivedi, the director of the Chanakya, well-known TV serial. And we are looking for money right now. That's where we are. We need around 50K right now as a first step to realize this. I have been reaching out to people, and people have been very generous and have given the pledges. Some money have started coming, but I have to follow up to the pledges what people have given. It comes through, and I'm pretty sure it will. So we are making this progresses, and these are the couple of announcements which I wanted to bring it out to your attention. And I think with this, thank you everyone for joining today's call. And we will meet you on December 5th. Unless anybody wants to say something, please feel free.
You're going to send out an email?
So I'll be sending out tonight for Alok Das program. I'll be sending out email tonight.
For everybody, he is sending out email tonight.
Yes. Okay. So unless no one has any question, we can stop today's program. And thank you.